Reclaimers. It's a term in the Halo universe that's come to somewhat muddy the waters in regards to what is and is not defined as a reclaimer. The widely accepted overarching understanding of what a reclaimer is simply a member of humanity who has been somewhat chosen as being the heirs to the Forerunners and thus are the reclaimers of everything the Forerunners left behind. The problem is that if you look at different aspects and different parts of the lore, sometimes it seems referenced that all of humanity are reclaimers, and sometimes it's referenced that only some of humanity are reclaimers. So today we're going to go through reclaimers and find out the truth of exactly what reclaimers are, what is defined as a reclaimer, and come to a rather stark realization towards the end of the video. So, with that in mind, let's roll the intro. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and let's just kick this video off straight away by clarifying a couple of things immediately. Reclaimers. They are, by their very definition, humans who are able to use Forerunner devices and are identified by Forerunner ancilla, such as monitors, as being reclaimers and thus the inheritors of the Forerunner's legacy. That's literally as clear as I can make it. Now, back in the day, with the original trilogy of the games that were curated by Bungie, it was at least relatively clear that all of humanity were reclaimers. There were even cut levels that revealed a Forerunner sarcophagus, and when the Arbiter looked inside, the skeleton of a human lay in situ, pointing quite clearly to the idea that at least Bungie intended the Forerunners to be a version of ancient humans. Which I can already hear some of you jumping to the logical conclusion that Bungie wanted humanity to be Forerunners, thereby clearly outlining the relationship between the Forerunners and Reclaimers, and then 343 Industries took tenure of the franchise, and that's when they changed things and made it so that Forerunners were a completely separate race, and thus the connection between Forerunners and Reclaimers was much more tenuous, and that they retroactively applied law to this situation to try to reason it out. But it isn't as clear as that. Even the terminals from Halo 3 actually suggest directly that humans and the Forerunners were separate entities to a degree. Whether this is the fact that they were still humans, but there was a more primitive version of humans still living on humanity's homeworld, and they were protecting them and trying to lift them up, or whether they were quite literally different species, is still subject to interpretation. The wording in some of the terminals, particularly in reference to the Librarian and the Didact's conversations, suggests that humans were entirely separate and unique to the Foreigners.
I'm trapped on a beautiful, empty world. Its inhabitants have been safely indexed. Every single one of them. They're special. Well worth the effort it took to build one final gateway, even at this late hour.
Yet, we also have those cut levels that suggest that humans and Foreigners are the same thing. So this already muddies the water, and then of course the franchise did pass to 343 Industries, and adjustments to the law were made, whereby only certain humans were reclaimers. Now, this revised law allowed the Foreigners to be separated quite clearly from humanity, paving the way for 343's interpretation of the law, even though it is loosely based on aspects of the law that even Bungie brought into effect while they still owned the franchise. In either case, the physical separation of the Foreigners and the humans meant that the Foreigners could be explored as their own unique species, and ancient humanity could have their own rich, entrenched narrative in the deep lore of the Halo universe. And this ability to explore the Foreigner culture enabled the birth of what is known as the Gene Song, or the Gesh, which is basically the genetic imprint of alterations made by the Foreigners on the human genome. And again, with some of the expanded lore, it is heavily suggested that the librarian actually had a special population of humans that she imprinted with gene songs that ultimately became the thread of humanity that were expressed through numerous generations to become Reclaimers. Now, myself and KammyShep over on TikTok had a back and forth conversation about Reclaimers and whether or not there was actually any lore to support the idea that only some of humanity were Reclaimers, with his opening argument being that basically he had no source to back up that claim, and with me countering that there is at least one reference to the possibility being that only some of humanity are Reclaimers. In fact, I'll be honest, it'd be easier if I actually just play those two videos quickly back to back, so you get a feel for exactly what the context of this conversation was.
Whenever I give false information, I like to correct it when I find out. I think that's necessary to my goals of honesty and credibility. I've said many times on this channel that all Reclaimers are humans, but not all humans are Reclaimers. And while speaking to a friend on this subject, he questioned me on it. Where does that piece of lore come from? And that's when I realized I had no source to back up that claim. It was just one of those things I heard and took at face value. So we dove in and poured over any source we could find, even consulted other lore people, and we didn't find a conclusive answer, so we dropped the topic. Until today, during a casual reread of the Ace of Spades trilogy, I found a source that should prove once and for all whether or not all humans are Reclaimers. This comes from chapter 39 of Point of Light, where Ryan Forge speaks to a monitor about the librarian on a Forerunner planet called Bastion. Here's the full quote. All humanity carries the remnants of her, speaking of the librarians, work from times past, from generation to generation, becoming dormant but never gone. It is what propels our technology to recognize your status and allow interaction. This monitor clearly states that all humans carry the ability to access Forerunner technology. Thus, all humans are Reclaimers.
KammyShep, Installation 00 here. Great video on the Reclaimers. I've got to admit, I've made that mistake on quite a few occasions, differentiating between all of humanity being Reclaimers and only select humans being Reclaimers. So I appreciate the due diligence of going through all the sources and finding out the truth of it. However, I believe we've agreed before that there's different tiers of lore, so to speak, where things that are in the books rank lower than things that are in the games, for example. The games being kind of the penultimate lore, anything that's in the games it immediately becomes priority and retcons anything kind of below it, so to speak, in that ranking. The sources that you found were majoritively in the books, as I assume, but I believe I may have found an in-game source that may suggest otherwise, that may suggest that there are only select humans that are Reclaimers, as opposed to all of humanity being Reclaimers. And it comes in the source of Spartan Ops from Halo 4, the level The Key, where it is said,
Roland, translation. Elites were here, trying to find Reclaimers. Humans who can operate Forerunner technology.
Now, I know it's a loose reference, but the way in which that's said is suggested that there are only select humans that are Reclaimers. Otherwise, they would have just said elites were here trying to find humans, or trying to find Reclaimers. They wouldn't have gone on to clarify humans who can operate Forerunner technology. So that may or may not be a source that points towards some of humanity being Reclaimers, and not all of humanity being Reclaimers. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I'll very quickly take this opportunity to say that if you are on TikTok and you're looking for Halo lore, you really couldn't go wrong with KammyShep, so I implore you to give him a follow, and hell, while you're there, give your boy a follow too. And circling back to the point of this video, it's abundantly clear that 343 Industries intended for only some of humanity to be Reclaimers rather than all of humanity to be Reclaimers. And of course, when you take all of that into consideration with everything that happened with Bungie and the differences in their lore to 343 Industries lore, but also the self-contradictions in their lore versus the terminals in Halo 3, it still really muddies the water on what is and is not defined as a Reclaimer. The one individual we can absolutely guarantee is a Reclaimer, of course, is the Master Chief, as he is directly referenced on numerous occasions by numerous monitors as being a Reclaimer. Indeed, I'd even go a little bit further than that and say that he's defined as Reclaimer, singular, as in the Reclaimer. And again, if we reference the words from Guilty Spark's own mouth, or glowing orb appendages, or voice simulation system, what Guilty Spark said was that You are the child of my makers, inheritor of all they left behind. You are Forerunner. So we can guarantee in that regard that the Master Chief is a Reclaimer. So what is it about the Chief that makes him a Reclaimer? Is it his gene song, or is it something else? Well, the interesting thing is that there are many Spartans that seem to exhibit the traits of Reclaimers, being that they can interface, interact, and activate Forerunner artifacts. And very briefly before we move on from this, it's not like they just know what buttons to push to make it come alive, because we already know from direct example in universe that even if an individual is familiar with symbols and how to activate certain artifacts, doesn't mean that they'll be able to. This is exemplified in the cutscene in Halo Wars when the Prophet of Regret attempts to activate an artifact and it rejects him entirely, likely detecting that he is not a Reclaimer. He's not even human. He's a Sanchayum. But we also know that it's likely that Fred is a Reclaimer, because while he, the other Spartans, and Dr. Halsey were underneath the castle base, Fred was receiving an upgrade to his Mjolnir armor's motion tracker system, and at this time was not wearing one of his gauntlets. And while thinking about the other Spartans, he absentmindedly reached out and touched some crystalline symbols in the walls of the cave, and in so doing, cut his finger, and a small droplet of his blood awakened those symbols that began to glow from a deep cherry red all the way through to a bright emblazoned gold, snaking their way down along the walls of the cave, with a large symbol appearing in the centre of the crystalline arrangement. And while the symbol isn't actually described, it's likely it was the Reclaimer symbol, and Fred once again reached out to touch it, which caused the rough-hewn cave wall to suddenly have seams and grooves appear in its surface that then pulled away to reveal a large 20-meter high Forerunner corridor that arced deeper into the surface of the planet. So with both Chief and Fred seemingly having the power of a Reclaimer, one then has to wonder, is it possible that the Spartans' lineage can be traced back to the Librarians' special populations of humans? I mean, Spartans are already supposed to be genetically superior to most normal humans, so that makes one wonder if they're genetically superior by nature. Does that imbue them with the natural traits of a Reclaimer? Or is it that the thread of lineage that can be traced all the way back to the Librarians' special population of humans manifested in the modern era as Spartans? This would at face value seem to make a lot of sense. Spartans are genetically superior, they've likely been manipulated by the Librarians' gene songs to be superior humans, closer in fact to our genetic ancestors, and thus it would make sense that then all Spartans are Reclaimers. But that isn't entirely accurate either, because although, admittedly, it seems like most of the Spartan 2s have some degree of Reclaimer genetics within them, not all Spartan class candidates were picked from such strict genetic markers. The Spartan 2s were most definitely picked from very strict genetic markers as derived by Dr. Halsey's calculations, and again we know from Halo 4 that Dr. Halsey is also a direct result of the Librarians' manipulations, but these strict genetic markers are almost exclusive to the Spartan 2 program. The Spartan 3 program were recruited as orphans of the Human Covenant War, and really didn't need the genetic markers in order to have 100% successful augmentations, mainly due to improvements in the augmentation procedures. Which is not to say that there aren't certain Spartan 3s that likely do have those genetic markers and may actually make them more pronounced or more powerful Spartan 3s as a consequence, but that's a different subject. And as for the Spartan 4s, they're picked as fully grown consenting adults, and thus really no genetic markers are needed to become a Spartan at all. You just need to effectively volunteer and have the mettle to see it through. I bring this up because although a lot of Spartan 2s seem to be Reclaimers, we've also witnessed certain Spartan 3s and certain Spartan 4s being Reclaimers. So can the Spartan from Fireteam Crimson, as is highly evident during Spartan operations on Requiem. It is also at least possible that Noble 6 is a Reclaimer, although we never see them directly use Forerunner devices. It is at least heavily suggested on numerous occasions that Noble 6 is unique among Spartans, unique enough to be comparable to the Master Chief. The unidentified Spartan 4s in Spartan Assault and Spartan Strike can also loosely be defined as Reclaimers, although neither have been confirmed as being the same person, although it's also worth noting that both of these respective games take place within a combat simulation, reliving the events of actual operations performed by various soldiers from the UNSC, so strictly speaking, any use of foreign attack is either retroactively applied complements of the combat simulation, or the actual soldiers during the real-world operations were capable of using foreigner devices. Moving on from that, our multiplayer character from Halo 4, 5 and Halo Infinite may also be a Reclaimer. And indeed on that note, our multiplayer character between all three games might not actually be canonically the same Spartan. In fact, it's likely that it's not. Halo 4 is a wargame simulation aboard the Infinity. Spartan Ops is actually an in-universe mission during the second Requiem campaign. Halo 5 is also a wargame simulation taking place aboard the Infinity during and after the events of Halo 5. Infinity falls at the start of the Halo Infinite campaign, and the multiplayer picks up with seemingly a new Spartan 4 recruit training at the Avery J. Johnson Academy of Military Science. In either case, that means that of the games we've played, there are as many as 8 characters whom are all Reclaimers. Now, given the rarity of Reclaimers, what are the odds that we just so happen to have played as a Reclaimer in nearly all Halo games? Now it's time to get a little bit meta. What if none of them are Reclaimers? What if the Reclaimer is us? These characters are supposed to be vessels we, as the player, occupy and embody. We are the active consciousness that makes every decision that these characters take. Without us, the player, these characters wouldn't do anything. And yes, of course, there's peripheral events going on in the Halo universe where there are characters that we never actually control that exhibit Reclaimer-esque characteristics. This really specifically happens within the books. There's precious few examples where characters within the games exhibit Reclaimer-like characteristics that we don't at some point or another control. Even Fred, while seemingly being a Reclaimer and really existing almost exclusively within the books, did appear in Halo 5, and if you play the campaign with friends, one of you will be Fred. And in truth, even when you're reading the books, it's you reading the events of the book. It's your consciousness that is aware of this story being told. Without you, the book wouldn't do anything. It would just sit there, inert, not telling its stories. It's your consciousness that makes the story happen. It's the very interaction with the game that allows our consciousness to be transmitted through the character model and into the Halo universe. It's what makes your Spartan the one who's prone to adorning their armor in unique ways, using weapons and grenades in unique ways, prioritizing targets, utilizing equipment, traversing the environment, shuffling to dodge incoming fire, teabagging, goofing around, firing into the sky when you win, yeeting yourself off the map at the close of the game. All of these unique little quirks that the character model exhibit in-game is as a direct consequence of your personality, consciousness, and will shining through. So with all that said, I think it becomes a natural step in logic that the term Reclaimer doesn't apply to specific humans in the Halo universe. The Halo universe has no Reclaimers. Reclaimers don't exist. The term Reclaimer applies to the consciousness that is aware of the events taking place and or controlling those respective humans within the universe. And if that's the case, that means that the term Reclaimer applies exclusively to us. To you. You are the Reclaimer. And until next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Be sure to like the video if you did, and pop a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. I just want to take a moment to thank my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Sophia, Mikhail, Ashley, Jordan and Esoteric Sight, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Legions Lost, Labrat, Spartan0137, Jacob Kemp, Sean, Element Zero, J3, Mr. Keys, Gunslinger, Evermore, Personal Devil, Aldeas, Toxic, Scion Esports, Gem, Saber and Relentless, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who continue to support the channel. If you want your name on the end of the video and some perks earned along the way, head over to Patreon and consider supporting the channel yourself. Big shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob Kemp, Talia, Fenrir, Bornstella, Jimbo and Balaz, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy, with a special mention to the Accursed Hunter. Shout out to John due to the mathematical formula used to determine the area within a pentadodecahedron. Oh, and Lena because that sandwich. And remember, there are tons of ways to support the channel and keep my installation pumping out content at a breakneck speed. Much love to you all, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.